found myself shipwrecked on a beach, so naturally the first thing I did was to punch the air. Then I picked up some wood, did a roll and punched the air some more. With all that out of the way, it was time to do what I'd come here to do, gather loot and materials. You see, Beyond the Map is a game that essentially merges the loot and perspective of a game like Diablo with the resource gathering and crafting of a survival game like Valheim. With a piece of wood along with a stone I found, I crafted myself a spear and continued gathering resources and kicking crates which contained healing and mana potions. I was a little salty that cleanliness was not rewarded in this game, as my quick swim in the ocean punished me with the wet debuff, reducing my health and mana regeneration for a minute. That being said, I didn't let that minor setback get to me, and I happily continued gathering both stones and pieces of wood. It wasn't long before I ran into my first enemy. Actually, it was more like a whole pack of them. Vile undead abominations. They gave chase and they came heavily armed with both sword and shield, a bow, and one of them even conjured fireballs which he hurled at me. I had put my spear to work and taken down one of them, but I had suffered some devastating blows in return. Thankfully, I'd kicked those crates earlier and was able to chug a healing potion. While I did a poor job dodging enemy attacks, I eventually managed to defeat my adversaries and could claim their loot. With the fighting out of the way, it was time to use the materials I had gathered, so I crafted myself a stone hammer that could be used for crafting, along with a stone axe which, not surprisingly, could be used for chopping trees. And with that done, I had a look at the loot I'd gotten from the enemies. They had dropped 3 different skill books, which I right-clicked to learn. Defeating the enemies had also increased my level to level 2, which had rewarded me with a general stat increase along with a skill point on top of my starting skill point. These points can be used to unlock skill slots that can either be used for active skills or glyphs providing passive boons. As such, I could now equip 2 of my 3 new abilities, a fireball, a sweeping strike, and an aim shot to use with a bow. As I didn't have a bow yet, my choice was simple. Next, I decided to put my lumber axe to work, and I chopped several trees before learning the hard way why you call it an accident. This minor mishap resulted in me losing a slight bit of experience, but aside from that, the consequences weren't too dire as I respawned on the beach very close by and was able to run back and pick up all my stuff again. I got my revenge on the tree by literally chopping it to pieces, which coincidentally left me with enough pieces of wood to build a workbench. At the workbench you could craft multiple items including armor, better tools, and a bow and arrows. Naturally, I crafted a bow along with 60 arrows. I also had a look at what other crafting stations I could build before putting down a campfire as prompted by the game's tutorial. The game's tutorial was now prompting me to search for food, but I found it more pressing to build a little bit of defense around my new base. So I started to build a wall to surround at least part of my base, but I fairly quickly ran out of wood, so I had to chop some more trees as well. Once I eventually finished a small semicircle of wall, it was time to go look for food as prompted by the tutorial. I got to test out my new bow and fireball spell on a young turtle, which rewarded me with a piece of turtle meat. I also got to try out my new arsenal against some stronger foes, and this time I fared quite a bit better than I did during my first encounter with the undead. I made it to level 3 and unlocked another skill point along with another stat increase. I continued fighting on the beach as the drowned undead enemies dropped linen cloth which could be used for crafting clothes. Eventually one of them dropped my first real piece of loot, a skirt offering a bonus to stamina and intellect along with increased critical damage and cooldown reduction. The main stats in Beyond the Map are pretty straightforward. Stamina increases max health, intellect increases magic damage, agility increases bow damage, and strength increases melee damage. I also made it to level 4 before finally deciding to return home to cook the meat. Cooking turtle meat offered a sizable bonus to intellect for 20 minutes. With the new skill points I'd unlocked, I could also finally equip the aim shot ability. With the linen cloth I had acquired from fighting the drowned, I crafted myself a pair of rack boots offering a movement speed increase, along with the rack tonic offering me some defense plus a random stat, and I got 3.1% attack speed. I was very pleased with my movement speed increase as I like going fast. Also, it was great not being half naked anymore, as it was starting to get pretty chilly. Now was probably a good time to build a bed, so I got to work and placed down a bed. Unfortunately, a bed is no good without a roof over it, so I had to get back to my favorite activity, chopping wood to pieces. With that out of the way, I started constructing what could maybe be generously called a shed, but hey, it was mine and it would at least keep me somewhat sheltered. With shelter taken care of, I crafted myself a skinning knife and eyed the bone tools including a pickaxe which I desperately wanted, so I tried out the skinning knife on a nearby bear hoping that it would provide me with the bones I so desired. Unfortunately it didn't, but I can confirm that bear plus skinning knife equals leather strips plus bear meat. I reached level 5 by taking down a risen warrior before returning home to build a leather working table. This apparently also needed a roof, so I was forced to do some more construction. I'm not really sure why you wouldn't be able to use a leather working table without a roof, but I guess it's just allergic to rain or something. I moved my campfire inside and used my newly acquired leather to craft a hunting bow at the leather working table. Then I spent the rest of the night and early morning hours expanding my house further and chopping wood, as all these sensitive crafting stations clearly would end up requiring way more space under my roof than I would currently be able to supply them with. I also decided to begin putting down some more defenses in the form of wooden spikes along my walls. Apparently bones could be collected from giant remains along the beach, This was fantastic news, and after collecting a ton of bones and slaying a lone undead scout, I could finally head home and craft my first pickaxe. Not only did the new pickaxe make it a whole lot easier to gather stone, but it also allowed me to mine copper, and it did not take me long to find my first copper deposits. I continued my copper mining spree. The collector in me had been activated for real now, and there was no stopping. I mined away, dreaming of all the stuff I'd be able to craft with the copper I was mining, despite having no knowledge of what copper could actually allow me to craft. Eventually, I was rudely interrupted by a wolf, although I quickly forgave it as it dropped me my first pair of shoulder armor. It provided me with more intellect and stamina, along with health on kill, and most importantly, mana gain on basic attack. This find is what settled that I'd be building into a spellcaster build. While searching for more copper, I came across a chest on top of the ruins of a wooden structure. Unable to think of another way to reach it, I resorted to brute force and hit the structure repeatedly with my spear. That worked. The chest contained a couple of gemstones along with a pair of shoulder plates. I returned home to continue expanding my house and cook some meat. Then I crafted a chest for storage along with a charcoal kiln where I could convert wood to coal. I also crafted a stone anvil where I could craft heavy armor, weapon and higher tier tools, and a primitive smelter where I could turn my copper into bars. Unfortunately, most of the things I could craft required bronze, which is an alloy of copper and tin, so I had to track down some tin before I'd be able to fulfill my dreams of crafting better tools. While looking for tin, I found 2 more chests, which it turned out that I could open by simply pressing E. No need for primitive violence. They contained some crafting materials along with a pair of intellect boots and my first ring offering me extra damage to unaware and staggered enemies. Tracking down tin didn't take me long and I soon found myself hacking away. While looking for even more tin, I was attacked by an angry boar. My fireballs easily took care of it, and while the flames didn't turn it into bacon, it did drop me my first glyph. And also I hit level 8. As mentioned, glyphs can be equipped in skill slots. They always come with a passive boost, while sometimes also coming with a drawback. On top of that, connected or adjacent skills gain an additional effect. In this case, the glyph provided me with damage reduction from enemies as long as I was facing them, and further damage reduction after casting a connected skill. I found another chest and a bear dropped me an intellect rope. My magic build was at this point coming together quite nicely. I also found another glyph that provided me with a stacking buff every second out of combat. These stacks would be consumed by my next attack and increase damage dealt by 2% per stack up to 200% extra damage. Skills connected to this glyph would build stacks per hit that you'd gain upon exiting combat. A pack of drowned enemies dropped my first rare item. A pair of agility shoulders gave me 16% more multi-shot damage. As I was leaning fully into my magic build, these were of little interest, especially considering I had not yet unlocked the multi-shot ability. However, shortly after, a risen howler dropped another rare item for me. A ring providing me with crit chance and mana on kill along with an increase to sweeping strike damage, which also wasn't of interest to me. The mana on kill was great though. I returned home and collected the copper bars that had been smelting and the coal that had been, whatever coal does. I upgraded my tiny storage chest to a proper stash as my most recent expedition had my inventory filling up rapidly, especially as I still didn't know what to do with all the loot I found that I didn't have a use for. With tin collected, I could finally start smelting bronze bars, so I started smelting a bunch, and while waiting for them to smelt, I got to work on the house. I built a floor, I built stairs, and I built more walls. At this point I could finally collect my bronze bars, and I collected 24 of them. I was curious about how other melee weapons felt, so I used 8 of the bronze bars to craft a bronze greatsword. I got distracted before crafting better tools and crafted a spell forge and a sharpening wheel. I haven't really talked about it so far as it hasn't had much of an impact, but tools have durability and will eventually wear down. The sharpening wheel, however, allowed me to repair metal quality tools by simply interacting with it, so it was a very welcome addition to my base. Finally, I crafted a bronze axe and a bronze pickaxe, which would greatly increase the speed at which I could gather resources. Then I had a look at the spell forge where I could enchant my equipment with various stat increases using materials from disenchanted equipment. So happy that I had saved all the loot I had found, I disenchanted some of the useless stuff. My crafting spree continued and I built myself a water well. Drinking from the water well would provide me with a 15-minute buff, increasing my mana regeneration. I also built myself a tailoring table and immediately crafted myself a hood, as the items from here offered some very juicy looking set bonuses. Wearing just 2 of the pieces would reward me with a 10% chance to increase my damage by 20% for 3 seconds on spell hit and restore 10% of my mana, while wearing 4 pieces would also give my spells a 20% bigger area of effect. Thankfully I had enough linen to craft a sash too, and with that the 2 set bonus was mine. I was fairly sure that this in combination with the buff from the well would eliminate all my mana issues and allow me to essentially spam my fireball ability. But I wasn't done crafting yet. I also crafted a cauldron which allowed me to combine multiple different types of food for stronger buffs than cooking a single type of food. On top of being stronger, food cooked this way could also be eaten multiple times from the cauldron. While trying to enchant my new hood with plus 10 intellect, I was rudely disturbed by a roaming pack of the drowned, and I got a chance to test out my new greatsword, which unsurprisingly couldn't compete with my fireball. With the disturbance dealt with, I could finally enchant my hood with plus 10 intellect. I also realized that you could use materials, including enchanting materials and gems, to upgrade your items to higher rarity items. After that discovery, it was time to go hunting enemies for loot for disenchanting, along with finding linen so I could craft the remaining set pieces and upgrade the rarity of my armor. Doing this, I found a rare ring providing health on hit, mana on kill, and extra damage to Ice Storm, which I was yet to unlock. On top of that, I also acquired 3 new glyphs, one of which converted 20% of ranged and melee damage to spell damage and doubling this spell power for connected skills. This meant that strength and agility were no longer entirely useless stats to me. Eventually, I had enough materials to craft the set rope and braces and unlock the 4 set bonus. I also had enough materials to upgrade the rarity of my belt, which when upgraded to rare quality got a slight stat increase along with an extra stat, which in this case was 53% increased potion effectiveness. Next, I crafted a hoe and planted a few carrot seeds that I had found in the ground just outside my base. At this point, I had made it to what was currently the final challenge in the game, which was to track down and defeat each of the 6 different elemental types. So now it was time to start exploring the whole island. This meant fighting off significantly bigger packs and much stronger enemies than I had so far been encountering. While I was exploring, an enemy using a flamethrower-like ability targeted me in what can only be described as an attempt to barbecue me. Unfortunately for them, I would be the one doing the barbecuing today, as I took him out with a single fireball, and on top of that got the skill book for Incinerate, as the flamethrower-like spell was called, along with the skill book for multi-shot. I tried out both of my new abilities, and while the Incinerate was cool, I still preferred the Fireball as it simply dealt more damage. I continued exploring the island while mining, chopping trees, and fighting off enemies when a wolf dropped a very exciting glyph. The glyph of Wind Shadow converted agility to attack speed instead of ranged damage and gave all connected skill crit chance equivalent to my attack speed. This was a fantastic find, as my mana was more than fine for infinite fireball slinging, so the extra attack speed would be a big damage increase on top of a significantly increased crit chance. While fighting enemies, it finally happened. My first legendary dropped, a heavy chest armor with strength and lots of other stats, and a legendary effect granting slightly over 20% increased chance to trigger on-hit effects. Dopamine was rushing through my veins at the sight of another legendary mere seconds after the first one had dropped, but there was an issue, a big issue. An invisible wall was blocking my path, and after multiple attempts I had to give up and forfeit the legendary item. The loss of a legendary that rightfully should have been mine had not only woken the loot goblin in me, it had angered it, and now it was desperately screaming for more loot. I slew enemies left and right for all of 30 seconds as I realized my inventory was full and my food, order, and rested buffs had expired. So for the first time since I started the game, I used my F ability, which had a 15-minute cooldown, and teleported back home. I quickly emptied my inventory, disenchanted some items, and reapplied my buffs so I could head back out. But before doing so, I crafted the set shoulders and started smelting more tin, just in case I'd need it. After a long run back, I didn't get to see much loot or take down many enemies before underestimating a single enemy archer and finding myself well and truly dead. This death was a lot more punishing than the first, as I not only lost a significant chunk of experience, I also dropped all of my equipment on the opposite side of the island. So I had no choice but to streak across the island, hoping that no enemy would give chase. Thankfully, I made it there safely and could collect my stuff, as I have no idea if my stuff would have been lost forever if I had perished once more before collecting it. At this point, the enemies I was fighting was no joke, as was evident by the single archer taking me out, with the shield-carrying enemies taking upwards of 10 fireballs to take down. But after taking down multiple packs of enemies, the starving loot goblin inside me was finally fed with a double legendary drop. A medium agility chest with a legendary perk making burn damage more than double in duration and allowing burning effects to spread to nearby enemies. And a pair of heavy strength shoulders with a whopping 54% extra crit chance against frozen enemies. As I was currently wearing 5 set pieces, I decided to give the chest piece a try, as I could still maintain my set bonus. Extended burn duration combined with automatically spreading to nearby enemies was pretty handy for taking out weaker enemies, but ironically the burning damage was a drop in the bucket against the stronger enemies I'd been fighting. It wasn't long before my next legendary item dropped, but before I could pick it up I was interrupted by a gargantuan being. A massive bone construct came stomping towards me. Thankfully the bone construct was less menacing than it looked, as it moved about as fast as one would expect a being consisting of various bones poorly glued together with magic to do. With that dealt with, I could finally inspect my loot. A pair of heavy legendary strength pants, and these also came with increased burn duration and spread. Shortly after I found yet another legendary, and this one actually had intellect, which was great as I was in dire need of a damage increase. The legendary perk on these shoulder pads was also quite promising, as it offered a 226% increased bonus to enchants on this item. So the legendary chest with the burn duration I had been wearing was sacrificed to maintain my 4-set bonus while wearing these new shoulder pads. I made it to level 20 and soon had explored all the way along the coast of the island without finding a single elemental. I started to question whether the elementals even existed, but while mining some tin, my luck changed. I was attacked by a small group of shadow wraiths, which I took out with ease, and with that I could check off the first of the 6 different elemental types from my list. At the center of the shadow elemental domain I found a weird swirling void. I cautiously approached it, expecting the worst. At first nothing seemed to happen, so I kept interacting with it until I finally realized that it provided me with a buff to mana regeneration. Then I continued my search, and not long after I found the next elemental type, the Frost Elementals. At the center of their domain was an ice block which replaced my current shadow buff with a new one, granting 10% extra critical damage. As my inventory was full, I had to halt my hunt for the remaining elementals and return back home. The Frost Elementals had dropped a skill book teaching me to cast an Ice Storm on a short cooldown. After some disenchanting, I realized I could craft a magic offhand which ended up providing me with slightly more spell range and a few other bonuses. I paired this with a bronze dagger that provided me with some extra attack speed and crit damage. Then I enchanted my offhand with a 10% increase to critical strike chance. I also enchanted my shoulders with 10 intellect, which with the legendary perk gave me a whopping 32.6 intellect. Next I upgraded my magic offhand twice, all the way up to legendary quality. Its legendary perk turned out to be quite useful as it provided a boost to the elemental boons and allowed me to have 2 of the elemental boons active at once. Having done that, I still had enough materials left to upgrade a few more items to rare quality. And before heading back out, I realized that the elementals had dropped me some elemental residue, which was all I needed to be able to build a waypoint. As I currently only had enough residue for one waypoint, I decided I'd better bring the materials with me and build one on the northern part of the island, away from my base. So I ran back up and built it close to where I had first encountered the shadow elementals. Shortly after that I found the water elementals, which meant I had now tracked down half the elementals. As my current adventure beyond the map is coming to an end, I'm going to end the narration here and instead briefly talk about my thoughts on the game while hunting down the remaining 3 elemental types. So first of all, I have really enjoyed my time with Beyond the Map and it's currently one of my most anticipated games. That being said, I'm not actually going to play the game when it releases into early access on August 25th, as I really want to hold out for co-op. The co-op is planned for the game and if we're lucky it might be out by late 2025, so hopefully the wait won't be too long. I should mention that the early access release will include more islands, more materials, dungeons that we can actually venture into, and some reworks more specifically to enemies and items that will now have levels, so they actually will scale appropriately. It's also worth noting that the new demo progress carries over to the early access release, so if you're interested and don't want to wait for co-op, you can actually jump in right now and start. So I just want to point this out as I'm personally really excited for this game. Basically, I don't really have any real points of critique for the game considering where it's currently at in its development cycle. The game hooked me by combining 2 of my favorite genres, ARPGs and survival games. So basically, I love what I played and I'm super stoked for the co-op release. I still want to give some kind of feedback though, and my main feedback is really just that the game needs more of everything. It needs more enemy variety, it needs more medals or tool tiers, it needs more loot, it needs more crazy legendary perks, it needs more building options. I want to be able to build way more stuff than is currently available in the demo, and I assume the early access will give us a lot of these requests already. I'd also love to see a skill tree / abilities that actually interact with the survival elements of the game, because we're pairing these 2 genres, but the skill tree is not really blending these genres at all. So I think it's a shame we don't have stuff that you could specialize into professions or learn spells that help with mining and farming or tree chopping, whatever. Like think outside the box here, since we're already doing some genre blending. So that's something I really hope to see. Currently, I think my biggest concern for the game is whether the itemization will hold up for extended periods of play. Currently, I actually think the itemization is quite good. It steals a lot from other games like Diablo. So it has a strong foundation, but it's crucial that the loot will remain fun as you keep playing the game. And I assume longevity of the loot will be helped greatly by enemy levels and item levels being introduced, as that means that stuff you find at level 5 will not be very useful once you reach level 20, I assume at least. And also crafting could use a bit more determinism in my opinion, considering you get random stats whenever you craft. And then on top of that you get another random stat each time you upgrade, so it feels like you need to get lucky like 3 times in a row to get a really good item. And it shouldn't be easy getting a really good item, but currently it's maybe a little too tedious crafting basically. Like I don't mind the resource grind, but if you're just sitting and crafting items over and over and over and over and over hoping to get one good item, that's not a fun gameplay loop, so I think that needs to be addressed as well in some way. So all in all, I'm super impressed with what I've played so far, and I'm looking forward to jumping back in as soon as the co-op releases.